Wayne.
So glad to be with you.
Oh, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, just a little bit. It's
Breathe deep.
two devices going
Uh-oh.
on
Heavy
here, so let me
breathe.
just
Hang
get
on.
this one off. Okay, I think we're good.
We're good. Hey, we're good to go. You ready to launch this thing?
I am.
All right. Well, Gary, amazing program we had with you last time. The folks so much enjoyed it. I was holding up your book, man. This is kind of like a Bible in itself. I was pointing out how many bookmarks I got in here. So I'm still reading it, man. I'm rereading some parts of it. And Gary, let's sort of recap a little bit. Now we're talking your book here about how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan to enslave humankind. There are so many chapters in that book, and we were sort of going down them. But let's sort of recap for our new viewers what inclines you to do this type of research and produce such a work.
Well, the first thing is that I was a very much a prophecy buff, and as I was cataloging all the different aspects of prophecy, I came across all of these references to the giants and to all the different stories that come up with the giants even after the flood. And then when you got to Revelation, I read about the abyss, I read about Michael and throwing the dragon down to the earth, and the demons that are leading the kings into war for the war of Armageddon. And I thought what I would do is instead of venturing off on a prophecy book first, that's just pure prophecy, I thought what I would do is connect Genesis 6 to Revelation and write what I thought was going to be the shortest book I would ever write. But as it turned out, the research just kept opening more and more doors and just kept making it longer and so many more things being topped on it. So that wasn't my first motivation to write this long of a book or one on the giants. It's just I thought I would write a short book and cut my teeth on writing on the first one with the giants.
So how did you come up with the first title that says the antediluvian epoch, the age of great heroes? I mean, you had to start somewhere. How did that become the first part of it?
Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to ease people into the book, right? Because it's going to be. I was starting off on a very long journey that was going to go from Genesis 6 to the end time, and I wanted to sort of pull people in from this generation into something that is what I call a reflection or a recollection of the ancient past, and it's the heroes of old term that sort of caught my eye. And if I look at the ancient meaning of hero, well, that means demigod and born, human born from a god, and generally a male, but there are also females. And so these were superhuman beings from the antediluvian epoch. And then when we look at the superheroes today, even though we don't get that connotation that they're really reflecting the same idea, whether it's transhumanism or superpowers or whatever. So I wanted to connect the reader to, hey, you see this imagery going on today, and it's really just a retelling of the supermen or the men of renown or the heroes of old that was in antiquity, which is exactly the same language that shows up in Greek mythology with the heroes and hero worship after these heroes died. And of course, these were known as the Titans. And again, what I'm doing is I'm looping two different aspects of prehistory, the Bible, other mythologies, and connecting it back that there's a reflection into our time, and that is mysterious in itself. Let alone that Genesis 6 is talking about fallen angels marrying daughters of men and creating giants, which is quite unusual as well.
Okay, you know what? There's one area that I really haven't discussed with other folks considering when it comes around to the Genesis 6 message there. But the idea of them marrying, isn't that a sort of a legal term? And was there a ceremony? Was it in the celestial law book? Was it a mandatory thing for them to do that in order to have power or to create life?
If you're talking about the fallen angels marrying human females, actually, I don't believe there was a specific ceremony. In fact, if you look at sort of the root to harems, that goes right back to Nephilim and fallen angels as one of the traits. So they just didn't take a wife. They took as many as they chose. And the ones that went to Mount Hermon Well, there was 200 of them went to Mount Hermon, and that's where they started. But that's not necessarily where they stopped. So they basically married or just cohabitated with as many women as they felt that they wanted to.
Okay, so that was written then in the biblical text as a term of endearment or sort of a connection to. It was demonstrated as a union that could resemble a marriage.
Yes.
And has all the attributes of it, but maybe not necessarily the legality of it in those times.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. That's how I would term it.
The reason I asked that is because it seems that over time people have said that when the forces of evil from whatever other dimension operate into this realm, there's some sort of permission base that goes on. It's like a permission-based activity. Somebody's got to agree on this side for them to operate. So that's why I was kind of trying to see if there's a legality, sort of like like the Star Trek non-interference pact, like something in the heavens that says in order for you to do this, you have to do that, even if it's negative.
Right. So, I mean, there's two things that can go on. There's the permission side and there's the rape side. And I would submit that both were going on at the same time. So if you look at a lot of the women that say would have went to Mount Hermon in this case, they were prepared and permitting themselves to mate with the fallen angels to produce giants. They didn't realize that they would all die because their bodies weren't big enough to support the birth of these babies, and they had to do according to Enoch, they did a cesarean operation to take the babies out, and the women all died in the first generation. So they gave permission. And then after that, one presumes that there would have been other ones that would have permitted and cohabitated with them as well, but we also hear of so many other stories in prehistory where they just took any woman they want, and thus they probably would have raped them as well.
Wow.
I mean, take the connotation any way you want from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when these babies were born, did they have the supernatural power of the Father?
Well, that's not clear that they had the same powers as what the angels had. Although, if you get into the modern sort of mythos of the reptilians, and this changeling quality, that's how they're able to hide themselves. Certainly we know that angels had a changeling quality to come into the spirit side and take whatever form that they wanted, whether it's human or a seraphim form or whatever form that they chose. Did this get passed on to the Nephilim? That, there's no real proof of that. So that's just sort of the mythology that sort of follows along with it. Mm-hmm. But that's a possibility. It seems that they were given super size and they were given super strength and super ability because they weren't just these awkward giants. They were fleet of foot. They were the great warriors. They were nimble, they were fast, but we're not told that they were super gifted in mental capacities, although when you get into Greek mythology, the Nephilim or the Titans are taught or mentored by a specific centaur in an ancient mystery school, but that in there isn't the suggestion that they're the great philosophers of the end time. So I think they're the enforcers. I think they're the ones that were used to usurp the kingships, usurp the armies, and impose the government, impose the religion, impose the technologies, and impose the will of their partners.
Mm-hmm. Not to get too rude here, but well, this is the edge, so we're going to be a little rude anyway. But is it possible that's where the centaurs came, that perhaps the angels cohabitated with some of the animals?
Yeah, so when we talk about this great technology that was being developed in the ancient world, and even to the level that if you look at some of the other examples from other cultures and other prehistory accounts, that technology seems to have been greater than what we have today, and AKA the building of the pyramids and possibly even technology of flying machines and flying saucers as it connects with the alien mythos.
I don't know how extensive they came about, but what was that island nation that was destroyed by a great
Atlantis?
No, volcano. They were frozen in place. What's the name of that? Pompeii?
Oh, Pompeii, right.
Pompeii.
Yep.
Now, the way I remember seeing the documentary is there were open air sex rooms, just lined the streets, and there were beds there. But some of the pictures show the males with enormous members. Is it possible that those were actually the giants?
Yeah, certainly. Whether or not those were the giants, I mean, giants were living amongst that time, or it could have been representations of the religion that goes back. And even in the book of Enoch, it refers to their privy parts in the English language that they translate it to as being the size of horses. So I mean, this size of that organ is a significant part of the mythology, and one would think the physiology of a giant and the fertility nature of that whole polytheist religion.
Obviously, the subtitle of your book, The Giant's Plan to Enslave Mankind, presents the point that there may be here among us. In describing the superpowers that the ancients had, is there anybody that you know of today that seems to demonstrate those types of powers?
No, I certainly wouldn't look to the diluted bloodlines that are out there today as holding on to these powers. Although when you get into the secret societies and the 13 families and the relatives they're on, they are doing things in their rituals, whether it's blood drinking or other things, or in the mentoring and the initiation and the teaching, to create a higher cognitive thinking value, and that even to the point when they want to present the Antichrist, this is going to be somebody who's initiated and is Mensa, is like super smart, and is going to be able to obviously solve the world's problems, or at least appear to. And so cognitive abilities, yes, I'm not thinking anything else. And I think that's why you're seeing so much weight put into and money put into science and the development of other aspects to develop these superhuman sort of aspects, or create a Nephilim through DNA manipulation and creating a Superman effect that way, sort of what the Nazis were trying to do with the new man concept, which is the same type of concept as bionic parts, but they were doing it more through breeding of people, right? So
okay, all right. We have this question from guest 235. Have you heard of the military supposedly killing a giant in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I actually listened to that interview. I think it was Steve Quayle on Coast to Coast, and I've got a tape on it, and it's quite a compelling story. And of course, the individual was anonymous, but he was being interviewed on the show. So yes, I'm familiar with that. I don't have anything else other than that interview to substantiate it, but I understand this fellow has done a few interviews on that.
Kind of reminds me of some of the military guys that are coming forward now talking about Benghazi. They can't really come forward, but they seem to have compelling stories too. So yeah, amazing about that there. By the way, for those of you just joining the program, on our Newsmaker line tonight is Gary Wayne. We're talking about his book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And I do recommend getting that book, and a number of people bought that book, Gary, last time you were on, and we're very enthused about it. It is really the way you put it together in such a palatable way that you can digest the information. So many books seem to be scattered. I don't know how you got it so organized from the prehistory on up, and then the addition of various sources to go with some of the things you wrote. And I think I want to get over here to one of these, and it is the and I don't know if I can say this right, but it says chapter 23, the Rephaites and the Amorites. What was going on with those people?
Yeah, so we're talking about right after the flood. And one of the things I'm going to, introduce to the readers, and I give them a hint of it in the first section. But what I really want, or in the first two sections, and this is the start of the third section. So what I'm trying to do is get them used to the idea that there are names of nations, and there are people that are listed in the Old Testament that have no roots back to the Table of Nations, which is the descendants of Noah in First Chronicles and Genesis that created all of the nations. So the Rephaites and the Amorites are very, very significant people that dominate the early post-diluvian period, and in particular the Exodus and the conquest of the covenant land. And the Raphaites are said to descend from a fellow by the name of Rapha. And, of course, he has no connection to the Table of Nations, and the Amorites does as being a descendant of Canaan. But these are hybrid giants, so to speak, because I'll contend, just as with the descendants of Japheth, who also have a few names in there that are giant names like Magog and Gog. Those are giants out of Greek mythology, that some of the peoples of Japheth and most of the people of Canaan married into, the sons of and the children are married into the original surviving giants there and created these hybrid giants that filled the Middle East.
Well, see, what I was interested in, because you described them as giant aborigines, and
yes,
when I read that, I thought, well, are you saying that they were already there and they're not the descendants of giants, or they were naturally produced?
Yes. So if you look at the connection of Raphaites to Nephilim, there's something in between called the Anak. Or the Anakites, and in Numbers it'll say the descendants of Nephilim are Anak, or Anak are the offspring of Nephilim. And then you also read in Numbers and Deuteronomy that Raphaites and Anakites are the same, or Anakites more specifically are Raphaites. So all you have to do then is connect those together and say, okay, if Anakites are Raphaites and Anakites are Nephilim, you go Anakite, Raphaite, Nephilim, and the only conclusion you can have of that is that somehow they survived the flood, as with these other names, whether it's Emite or Zamzonite or Avite or Ozim or all these other names of these Raphaite, Anakite type tribes that survived, that somehow they survived the flood. So when you look at how is that possible, I mean, there's really only three ways. Either there is a second creation, or they survived on the ark somehow, or they had their own arks like in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But what's interesting, though, is one of the most famous Raphaites is King Og. And if you look at his account in Deuteronomy and Joshua, is he's listed as the last of the Raphaites. And, of course, he had a brother named Sihon who was killed, and Og's sons were killed, but Og is not killed in that battle. Mm-hmm. But you can't say that Og is the last of the Raphaites when you have all of these other Raphaites that are in the Middle East that they're about to cross the Jordan to do war with. And when you learn that Goliath, 450 years later or so, is also a Raphaite. So if that is saying that the Raphaites ended there, then the Bible is in contradiction. Or, as many Jewish legends and other mythologies will cite, is that Og and some other Raphaites survived the flood.
Okay, we have this question from guest 235 out of the live chat. Gary, have you done any studying on Mount Hermon? And some say there's a portal there.
Well, portals are all part of this whole mythology, that when you have angels coming in from another dimension and arriving on a mountain, which is not uncommon in the 7 sacred mountains around the world in all the different mythologies and religions, Chinese, Greek, otherwise, that there is something to do with a portal. And so Hermon is one of those sacred mountains. So let me do now a parallel to what Nimrod was doing with Babel. And that Babel, in the Akkadian translation, doesn't mean confusion of languages like it does in Hebrew. It means Bab as in gate and El as in God, so a gateway to the God. So what we're talking about here, and as I close that analogy off, is not only were they building this ziggurat or pyramid, not a tower, because tower, pyramid, ziggurat were all the same in the ancient world, and the sort of Mesopotamian and Armenian accounts this was a pyramid and it wasn't, or a ziggurat and it wasn't a tower, is that they were not only building this pyramid as an expression of their newly found sciences and technology or as a sort of rebellion against God, but they were also trying to create this gateway or portal for the gods to come back. Mm-hmm. So I understand that, but I've got nothing there to prove other than other mythologies and that to suggest that those portals are in place. But it's certainly a great connection and a great point.
Is there, with all the the history that you allude to in your book, is there any evidence of advanced technology that has been found?
Of advanced technology, not really.
Or was it not a technology thing at all? Was their operations of strength and supernatural power, was that all sort of in the supernatural realm, and they didn't need, say, computers and cell phones and things like that?
Well, I think that they had great technology, and they had great engineering abilities, and we see the engineering things that are lasting, and they built those specifically to as a monument to their society that they knew was going to be destroyed by the flood, because in so many different accounts they were forewarned about the flood coming. So they built these things, and they aligned it with sacred geometry. They aligned it with perfect measurements. They aligned it with somehow a technology that we don't have today. They aligned it with astronomy. They put all sorts of codes and symbolism into it as a message to a future time of what happened in the end time. Okay. And I think even though we don't have technology that's surviving, if we had a cell phone or something that we lost today, that would degrade over the period of time we have. So really the only things that don't really degrade are things like stones. Mm-hmm. So although there are some items out there that's on the net and otherwise, like the magic mirror, for example, mm-hmm. It's really hard to have a clear example that we have. But if it goes like anything else, like whether it's the skeletons of the little people or the skeletons of the giants or other stuff, amazingly it all gets sort of swept away by the Smithsonian or other organizations and not for public view.
Well, Gary, this goes back to my earlier question concerning rules. And you just said basically they were designing things with advanced rules, advanced measurements, geometry. So when they have those precision obelisks and gigantic monoliths aligned in a perfect way, aimed at a specific direction with specific drawings, engravings, does that then, is there a permission then, is that a key to unlock some sort of supernatural power or gateway? So in other words, are there rules that say if you do this, then this is going to happen? Or weren't they operating by rules? They were seeking something by doing that specific design.
Well, in the polytheist belief systems, and there are many, they do believe that if you do these things, you do these structures at certain locations, at certain geometry, and do certain rituals and things like that, you can open up portals. And of course, that's why people get carried away with, whether it's true or it's not, with things like CERN or the Baal temples with the two pillars and things like that, because it's all connected to that ancient mythology about how you create portals. Mm-hmm. But typically the portals are set, although that doesn't mean, I suppose, you can't recreate another portal through technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So really, but they were expecting results from the way they built their structures.
Yes.
Okay. All right. This question comes in from Curious. It says, were the blackheads mentioned in your book actually black people? And could you expound a little bit on who they were?
Yeah, so the blackheads refers to the hair, not to a specific race. But when you're dealing with mythologies of whether it's the Sumerians, and these were the Sumerians in this case, but if you were dealing with, let's say, the Kishamaya mythology, they would talk about four races just like the Sumerians do. So this was a black-haired people, and I think that was important to denote, because when we look at offspring of other of gods and humans, or fallen angels and humans, they tend to have different color of hair. They tend to be two different colors, one being blonde and blue-eyed with pale skin and hairy. The other one was red hair, green eyes, pale skin, and hairy, as opposed to the blackheads, which was more sort of representative of the mundane worker that they were certainly in Sumerian mythology, created to be workers, and then put into communities to build monuments to the gods and to worship them.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have this question here. This is from Pat's Angels. Why are these angels so evil? I normally think of angels as good.
Yeah, well, 2/3 of them are good. But 1/3, as we learn in Scripture, rebelled. and they rebelled before the creation of the Adamites for sure, and likely even before the creation of the earth. Or at least the renewal of the earth, because there's a lot of speculation that there was an epoch before Genesis 1:1. So a third of them did rebel, and I think they were, looking to rebel to have another universe or another place so they could live on their own, but that's not going to be the case. Although I think that's one of the reasons why in chapter 13 I call Lucifer's revenge. That the angels, the fallen angels, who were absolutely upset, enraged by the fact that Adam and his descendants were going to be raised over time to be higher than angels, and I think they've been out to destroy humankind to prevent that from the beginning, thus the creation of the Nephilim to do so. Mm-hmm. And secondly, if they can't destroy humanity and lead them astray, they want to try and create some sort of justification with so many people for their own rebellion that they would have their own universe. And again, that really comes out when you pick that up out of other religions, and particularly the fairy mythology.
Mm-hmm. In the attempt to enslave mankind, and I would speculate to some degree we probably are enslaved. And let me ask you a two-part question. One, of the total enslavement plan, what percentage of completion do you think we're at in that plan?
Well, we are getting to be very, very close. I think we're within, well, I don't like to predict time, but we're very, very close to the end time. We see so many different things of the end time shown in the Bible that are essentially in place, and we're just a few catastrophes and a couple major things, the major stumbling blocks, mm-hmm. Like world government and a world religion. Those are two big mm-hmm. things that have to come about. So mm-hmm. I think those are going to have to come about through catastrophes, mm-hmm. but I think we are very, very close to that time. And so the rebellion will be just as it says in prophecy, that at the time of the rebellion, at the time of the abomination, where people swear their allegiance and make their choice for Lucifer and the Antichrist or a choice for God, that is the ultimate rebellion. And that's where, even if we roll back from that, if you look at how these descendants in these secret societies look at us, they look at us as mundane, as a lower being. They look at us like cattle. They will slaughter us en masse beforehand, but they're going to keep around enough to work as a slave class or to do their rituals. So from that aspect and how they're controlling us today and trying to cattle herd us to permit the end time to come that they want to bring along, I think we're very, very close.
It's interesting you say that. The timing is impeccable, because I just read an article about somebody in Congress just wrote a book anonymously describing exactly what's going on in Washington, D.C., and he said that the government looks at the people as sheep, as dumb, and that they'll promise us anything, and that anything that we want to hear they'll say, but their ultimate goal, and always will be and always has been, to get reelected and to get more money, and that doesn't come in line. But the way they described the people is that they have a view that the population is dumb and they're just animals to be herded, and it's really quite a shocking book, and everybody's trying to find out who wrote that. It was shockingly honest to their view toward the American population, and in some respects, I suppose they're right. Now, here's a question from. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, we certainly, so many people are asleep, and we permit it, right?
Yeah, we do. And and not to get too political, well, why not? I'll get political.
Why not?
I think that curtain's coming back for a lot of people. There have been people at the point of the spear saying there's a fraud being perpetrated on us. There's some people trying to pull the curtain back, then they somehow accidentally die. But now that curtain's been thrown back, and people have seen the fraud that's been going on for years. And I don't know that they'll accept another round of, from a politician standpoint, yes, I'm here to help. Like Reagan said, the seven worst words ever is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So I don't think people are going to take that too much anymore, because there's a patterned political speech that comes out every election. You can expect lower taxes, better safety, better schools, and none of that ever happens, ever. And so you wonder why. All right, well, here's a question from Ohio. Gary, did Jesus ever encounter any giants or fallen angels?
Well, he certainly encountered Satan in his 40 days in the desert right at the end, just before he went on his commission. And Satan is that seraphim angel, and also known as cherubim. So definitely he encountered an angel. So when we also look at did he encounter any giants, there's nothing to say that he encountered giants, but what he did encounter were the bodiless spirits of giants called demons. Mm-hmm. And there's many accounts of Jesus dealing with demons, and one was even called Legion, and there was many of them, and they didn't want to be sent to the abyss before their time, and so they were sent into the cattle, and the cattle goes over the cliffs. But no, there's no recordings of Jesus actually visiting and speaking with giants. But what he did do, which was interesting, was he went to the Temple of Pan in Philippia and Caesarea, in the area of Mount Hermon and Bashan, and announced to the world that Peter was going to be the rock that he was going to build his church on. So I think from making a connection there that certainly Jesus was aware of possibly the descendants of the giants at that time, but certainly a message to their descendants and to the fallen angels, what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And we also know that while Jesus was in the grave, in 1 Peter, I think it says he goes down to the grave and talks to these spirits. These are the imprisoned fallen angels and the worst of the demons in that produced the Nephilim in the antediluvian epoch. And he went down there to visit with them and tell them that it's over. You didn't anticipate the resurrection. Tomorrow I'm going to rise, and your fate is sealed. And he also goes on to say, be aware of the days of Noah as being like the end time. So there's a lot of sort of stuff around it, but there is nothing there that I'm aware of that says that Jesus, spoke with a giant.
Gary, in your book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, you note that over 500 civilizations or historical records point to a great deluge, otherwise known as the flood. That seems to be a sort of a singular event that's been impregnated in the minds of humans of every stripe and in every place in the world. So would you say that fact alone demonstrates that actually occurred?
It certainly, to me it is. I mean, it's beyond plausibility that on all continents and basically all nations, all tribes, all religions, that there is this surviving account of the flood. Mm-hmm. The second thing is what the details that are within those stories, that they are so very, very similar accountings, maybe from a different perspective and a different people and a different religion of that account, but they are essentially telling the same story. And included in those stories are typically stories of the little people and the giants, which again, you start adding all of that up on the odds and permutations, and you get to an astronomical number pretty quick as to it being just coincidence.
Well, when Jesus sent the demons into the pigs, those demons didn't die when they went in the water, and the great deluge, the angels didn't die. Only the human offspring died. Where did the giants or the angels go in the great deluge?
Well, the angels have the ability to go from the spirit world or heaven to the physical world almost at will, and again, that's where we come back to these likely portals. And so the angels aren't affected by what happens within the physical realm. They can just sort of.
But didn't it say though, Gary, that God was only interested in destroying the human offspring?
Yes.
Why didn't He destroy the others, the fallen angels?
Well, I think you have to remember that you can't kill something that's immortal, right? So angels are immortal.
Well, from our standpoint, yeah, but
yes.
But couldn't God do that?
Well. Possibly. I mean, God is omnipotent, right? But what we do see is the end for these immortal beings is to be burned for eternity in the lake of fire, right?
Okay.
So I think immortal is immortal, but nothing is impossible for God. But the story that we're taught in Scripture is that they're going to, at the time of judgment, burn for the rest of the time in the lake of fire. So I think that's why he didn't. And plus, the story hadn't quite played out yet, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the second chance after the flood, and a set amount appeared to bring the number of humans that God is wanting into the future world, and all of this needed sort of to be played out. And also, the question is, well, why didn't he make sure that all the Nephilim were killed? And that's another very, very good point. Not that it was asked, but for me, it's a huge point. And two things. One is that all God said he was going to do is destroy all the life that he created. And so if you want to be a little bit technical, the Nephilim come from fallen angels and human beings, not from God. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is I think it's all part of the free choice and the aspects that it sort of sifts the ones that are going to have grace and the ones that aren't. And all through our generations of humankind, we have to make a choice on our own based on the limited information that we have. Are we going to follow God, or are we going to follow the ways of the world and the rulers of this world, which are the fallen angels, mm-hmm. and the ones who rule it for them, the Nephilim before, the kingships and the descendants, right down mm-hmm. through the generations. So I think it's set to be equal for all humankind with very little information to see whether or not we're prepared to commit on faith to God.
Mm-hmm. If a lion mounts a cow, there won't be a lion cow.
Right.
There is a biological line there. There's some law, something in the DNA, something in the design of biology that prevents that. For the Nephilim to come and mate into human women, that means that line was not built. That defense was not there, indicating that was let go or written into the code that they may do that. So couldn't one say that God allowed them to do that?
Sure he did. God is greater than all of the choices and things that angels will do and all of the free choices we're going to do. And he will allow this all to play out through free choice. Now, the angels in the beginning didn't have free choice. They were created immortal. But once these ones chose to rebel and the other ones didn't, well, that's a little bit of free choice coming in. So what's going on here is God is permitting all of this to happen and creating enough humans for the number that is written in the book of life to be taken into the future world, and that's a set timetable. Mm-hmm. So I think when we look at the angelic realm being able to pass on some of these traits somehow to create another being, they have something that other physical beings in this world doesn't have. But that's also why it's known as a violation against the laws of creation, which is one of the most significant charges against those impassioned angels that happen, that they've totally violated the laws that weren't permitted to happen. But one must presume God knew it would happen.
All right. So obviously that's part of a plan, a longer-term plan that we can't see the end of.
Yes.
And maybe that goes back to your point of faith, is that God has this under control, and if that's the way it happened, then that's the way it has to happen. So.
And the thing is through something as our free choice, and that we weren't created immortal, is we're going to be raised higher than angels. Mm-hmm. Why not just destroy the immortal ones that went bad and keep with the other ones? Why go through this process? So I think there's something to this free choice of loyalty.
Well, I'd like to judge some of them bad angels now and send them straight to hell, but evidently there's another time.
Yes.
Here's a question for you. It says, how could any other being survive a flood created by an all-knowing, all-powerful God designed to kill all life except for Noah's family?
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very good question. What we do know is this, is that you can interpret Genesis 6 as saying there was giants then, and then after as being after the days of Jared, or till the flood came, or after the flood. But we do know there was giants after the flood because they're just listed like crazy after the flood. So what we do know is somehow they showed up. So as I said, you've got three choices only. They were somehow survived on the ark. There was a second recreation, or some of them survived the flood. And other mythologies will talk significantly about the survival aspect. So that one to me makes a little bit more sense, but I recognize all three are possible. And even the Gnostics, they'll go so far as say that all the sons, or let's start with two sons of Noah's being giants, and then they'll say all three, including Shem, was, and then they'll even go and say Noah was a giant, and then they'll go and say that the wives were all giants too. But that's just the giant; they're just reflecting more of a giant perspective on how they survived. And then other people will say that, well, we know that Noah was pure, his wife was pure, the sons were that's pure, but we don't know anything about the wives. So were some of them giants, or did they have some corrupted DNA? And that's a possibility, but I'm not convinced that that's how it happened based on all the other stories about the recreation aspect at Sodom and at other locations, and then all the other stories about surviving the flood. All three are possible. I go with waiting two more than the third, but I can't rule any of them out.
Well, I'll tell you what, Gary, you've done some excellent interviews and other shows, but I guarantee you haven't got this question. Were any of the fallen angels transgendered?
Well, if they wanted to be, they could be. Because when they came into this realm, and I am going to name one that is. Okay. Okay. When they come in, great. That's what everybody really wanted to hear in this day and age. But when they came into the physical realm, they could choose what they wanted to be and what they wanted to be look like, and they could choose their gender. And so in the pantheon, you have these lower gods that aren't Nephilim. So, for example, there's two types of titans. There's a titan god, and there's a titan demigod.
Okay.
And these gods were created from the gods. So from when we look at that perspective, and the same with the Anunnaki, and that they can choose any gender that they want, and they also put on what they call the clothing or the physical characteristics of the physical world and are affected by it. I think the pantheon reflects in these lower gods that they had sex between themselves. So that's two of the sexes. Now, if we look at Pan, which is the temple I talked about earlier, now, and he also looks like in some depictions Baphomet or Azazel. He's got some transgender aspects about it. And now, is that just artistic reflection, or is that truly one of the aspects that they took, or one of the sort of bodies or the figures that they took when they came to this world? Possibly, but nothing in history that's recorded that I am familiar with that specifically says they're a she-male or transsexual or however you want to call them.
Oh, okay. Wow. Can't believe you said that. Okay. All right. Guess 235. Did Cain and Abel have the same father?
Another very, very, very good question. And so maybe some of the listeners aren't aware of the Satan or the serpent seed sort of thought process. And what that means is that the seed of the serpent was put in right from the time of Cain and possibly Abel. And in the Gnostic religion, that is a staple doctrine, that Cain is the son of, and there's a few variations here, so either Eve and Satan, or Eve and being raped by many other angels, or Lilith and Satan. And that this is the being that was presented to Adam and Eve to raise. And there's also a few that Abel was also from the same seed, but then they also have other gospels that say, no, he was actually human and mundane, and that's why the soil figuratively ate up his blood. But I'm going down Gnostic doctrine a little bit too far with that. The point of the matter is that this is more of a belief that comes out of mysticism, but there is one very, very tenuous link that leaves that possibility open. So if we look at Genesis 4:1, I think is the verse, and that's where Cain is born and Abel is born. In some translations, and from the original translation, I'll have an annotation that says Cain sounds like the word acquired. And then begotten could also be translated as acquired. So from that tenuous sort of connection, that's the only place in the Bible where that would leave that open, but those are alternative translations, and it's not saying that that is what it's meant to be. And if you get into the Targum, certainly some translations of the Targum, which was one of those holy books that they used in the first couple of temples to help define the Bible, it will say in some of those translations, and I think more the Middle European ones, that was done by an angel of God. It doesn't name a specific one, but a lot of those Targums also were influenced by Kabbalism, so now you have mysticism coming back in. So is that overlaid into it? And so it's hard to know whether that's the case or not, but it certainly has a lot of speculation out there. A lot of people believe in it. It's certainly possible, but scripturally, very tenuous. You can't make I can't make a firm conclusion on that, but I do leave the possibility open.
Okay. All right, Gary Wayne, we're right at the top of the hour. I've got your book in our background now, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Tell us a little bit about the book, how people can get the book, and where.
Okay. Well, the book is basically a 6,000-year connect-the-dots investigation into the descendants of the giants of Genesis 6, the secret societies, the mystical religions, the descendants of Cain, and the fallen angels that rose up around them to enslave the antediluvian world and cause the first apocalypse by water, known as the flood, how all of these organizations and descendants crossed the flood, how they affected the early post-diluvian world like Babel, Sodom, Gomorrah, conquest of the promised land, how they affected our history, what they're doing today, and how they plan on bringing about the end time, including presenting us the Antichrist from the descendants of Nephilim. Excellent. So that's basically the story in a nutshell. Where you can get it is Amazon.com, Amazon around the world online. You can get it from BarnesandNoble.com and order it to the store if you want. If you want to buy it through your local Christian bookstore, they can order it from Send the Light Distribution if they don't have it, or Ingram's. And if they want a personalized or autographed copy, they can get it from me from my website, Genesis6Conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. And you can have it personalized or autographed in any way that you want. And it's also available on pretty much all online bookstores in North America.
By the way, Cleet in our live chat says he's got his autographed copy coming to him. All right, Gary, just stay on the Newsmaker line there. We got your video off. We'll be back in 5 minutes. We're going to take a 5-minute break, all right?
Thank you.
All right, everybody, you're listening to or watching the Edge television broadcast. Tonight's guest is, of course, Gary Wayne, talking about the Genesis 6 conspiracy, how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan on enslaving mankind, and I believe that includes you. And all right, we got coming up in the next couple of weeks, Dr. Kevin Randall, UFO cover-up, and then we're going to have Steve Olson talking about the Nibiru, and Wes talking about Sasquatches. We're going to go to our break now. And welcome back to the Edge television broadcast. If you missed our exciting first hour with Gary Wayne talking about the Genesis 6 conspiracy, this program will begin to replay in the main player. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. Additionally, we'll put it in our YouTube or our TuneIn radio playlist where you can listen to the Edge on any device across any platform. And then we're also podcasting. For those of you who enjoy a good podcast, be sure to put us on your podcast playlist. We have a software we suggest. It's on the Edge's website. There are many different podcast softwares out there. It goes on iTunes and every which way. So that's it. Let's go back to our Newsmaker line. Bring back with us Gary Wayne. Gary, you back with us?
Yeah, I'm back with you, and so happy to be back.
Wow, man, talking about the Giants coming back. I'm going to just start off with this question from Kentucky Girl out of the live chat. She says, well, where are the Giants at now?
Okay, so if we look at the kingships that started after the post-diluvian flood, they created dynasties, right? So that's where most of them are sort of centered if you want to start following where they are today. So follow the kingship dynasties and the very, very sort of powerful nobles and close families that went with them. So look to the 13 families, which most of the people of conspiracy will be familiar with. Look to the royal families, and look to them not being like giants today, because even though they intermarried and continue to want to intermarry throughout history to keep the bloodlines as pure as possible, they still had to introduce some human bloodlines, even though they might be from a noble from relatives, but they would be diluted with human blood to prevent disease. So as that sort of moves on through history, then they were losing more and more of these qualities of what they looked like. And if you haven't read my book, you may not be aware of that. These original giants looked like snakes because they looked just like their parents, the seraphim angels, who were a seraphic, viper-like trait. And if you look at King Akhenaten or Pharaoh Akhenaten of the Amarna dynasty, if you ever get a chance to look at his face, and this is circa 1250 to 1300 BC, so 1700 years after the flood almost, depending on when you want to date the flood, but he still has these serpentine features to his face. And he also has kind of a womany-like figure, which is kind of bizarre. But
Bruce Jenner.
Anyways, look at the high cheekbones and look at the thin lips and the eyes, and you're seeing so that dilution of that features and the characteristics that would happen over time.
You mentioned Lilith in the first hour. Somebody in the live chat, it looks like they said that may have been Adam's first wife. Is that true?
Well, again, that's Gnostic doctrine from Gnostic Gospels, and they certainly will insert that before Eve was created, that's who was the consort of Adam. And there's even some traditions that Adam and Lilith had a child between them, and that was acquired, but that's not nearly as prominent as the other ones. So again, that is Gnostic doctrine. Understand Lilith is sort of the root to the vampire, baby stealing, blood sucking individuals of prehistory, and Lilith is the root to the word of screech owl. So when you look at screech owl in Isaiah, that's actually could be translated as Lilith. And the screech owl would hop on one leg like a goat, which starts bringing in all of these other occultic symbologies between vampires and godlike and all these other analogies. And she's also the root to the matriarchal bloodline of the giants. So she is actively in occultic mythology and legends and religions, a major part of the bloodlines of the Nephilim and the gods. And Lilith also connects back to Tiamat in that mythology, which is another name for Leviathan, which is another serpent-like imagery. So all of this just continues to connect, and I will explain this quite slowly in the book and get it to the end where it all starts to make sense, because there's a whole bunch of sort of information that comes with it to make those connections of those dots.
Yeah, I just had a picture. I think I grabbed it from your website there of Lilith, and here's that owl there. I mean, the owl is like showing up everywhere. It shows up on the dollar bill. It shows up Bohemian Grove. Shows up in Lilith's. And it looks like she's probably doing it or something. So I'm just saying, what is it with the owl? Is that one of the demonic horde's preferential animals or representations, or?
Well, it's also one of those representations that you see of these gods in prehistory, right? And you also see a lot of that in the Quiché Maya culture and mythology. So I think it's one of those animals that has been drafted into their iconology because it has a look like some of the fallen angels and perhaps some of the Nephilim. And also, I think the owl has that relationship with Lilith, and the screech owl that sort of wraps that in as well. So.
Not to drag you into political circles, but here you go. Which political candidate do you think the fallen angels would be most likely to vote for? Bernie, Hillary, or Trump?
Boy, they wouldn't want to make a choice on that one. So who would they most likely vote for? Wow.
Bet you didn't get that on Coast to Coast.
No, I didn't get that one. I think they'd have to go very purist in their views, and I think they'd have to go with Bernie.
Wow. Well, and I can see that because, say, like the devil promises you things and never really delivers. Yeah. So, I can see that.
The political side of the spectrum that has been promoted and created by the forces of secret societies, the Gnostic religions, and the descendants of giants is the left-wing persuasion. So whether it was communism, Nazism, Karl Marx, Lenin, these were all Trotsky, they were all Freemasons. So I would think that they would vote for a progeny of their ideology, which was the extreme left wing. So, and he's more extreme than Hillary is, and I know people can call Trump a Democrat if they want, but he's still not going to be anywhere near as extreme as Bernie is. So, I think they'd have to vote for Bernie. Just my speculation. Though.
Okay, I don't know. I might have grabbed this picture from your website. It's a Bible with a Masonic emblem on it, but that's out there. Why do the Masons feel they need to put a stamp of a Mason on? Does it void the contents of the Bible, or does it alter it or move it to what does it do for them?
So this is one of the reasons why I'm a contrarian. So I'm going to spit this one out, and there's going to be some people who are going to find it very, very interesting, and some people may find it a little bit upsetting. And but people are free to contact me afterwards, and I can explain it more in detail if they weren't satisfied with the answer. Okay. So you have to understand that the King James Bible is named after King James VI of Scotland, King James I of England, and he is a Stuart king. And he came across down through the lines from Bruce and Sinclair's and supported by both families all the way through. And people will say that King James was not a Freemason, but he was initiated April 15th in 1601, and there's a mural of that initiation in the Lodge of Scone, and I think another one in Perth, North Perth. And so it's on record that he was a Freemason. Now, that doesn't mean that he influenced the Bible or the King James translation in a way that was slanted, but I'm going to give you a few more things. So he created, not only to create harmony amongst the religions, because you have to remember there's a Presbyterian issue out of Scotland. James was a Catholic. The Catholic Church was no longer the Church of England. It was the Anglicans. You had the Puritans. You had the Quakers. You had all of this religious strife. And so one of the things he did was he made a move like Constantine to harmonize the kingdom and the empire in Scotland and created one Bible that all the churches were going to use after, the first one in the common language of that time. Okay, so he did a very, very good thing that way. But it was created by 47 of the most learned and pious people, as the Freemasons say, right out of the Masonic Bible, for that translation. Okay. Now, there's no record that Freemasons did or influenced the Bible, but I'm going to give you a few things to think about here. So, at that time, the most learned and pious people were Jesuits, who were also fans of the 7 liberal sciences and were moles within Catholicism. And you also had all of the elite and the nobles, which were mostly Freemasons, right? So you had the people who were part of these secret societies and belief systems translating the Bible. Now, they did a very, very good job of translating that Bible, but they did it for a couple other reasons. First is they wanted to move from the oral traditions of the old charges to a more written one of oaths and rituals of the new charges. And they wanted to do that through using this translation as a base. And they wanted to get the Polychronicon, which is the history of Freemasonry that goes right back to the antediluvian epoch, sort of put into the rest of the extended Bible that they're going to use. So, when you look at the King James Version, as we look at it, say, really except for 2 or 3 points, 2 of them are large with me as markers, it's a very, very, very good translation and amongst the best. But if you go to Isaiah 14:12, and it notes Lucifer, son of the dawn or son of the morning, well, that on modern translations, that's the only one where it lists Lucifer. And Lucifer is the god of the Freemasons. And it's the light that all Freemasons seek, and they get indoctrinated into Luciferian doctrine as an adept at the 3rd level of the York Rite or 33rd degree level of the Scottish Rite. So that's very, very interesting that of the modern translations, that's where Lucifer essentially only utilized. And it looks like they used that translation from Jerome's Vulgate Latin Bible, where they didn't know what to do with a word called in Hebrew, and there's a couple different spellings. It can be Heylel or Hellel. They didn't know what that was. but it's got L on it. For me, that denotes a name of an angel, as in Michael or Zaziel, or all of them have an L at the end of it, representing God. And so in the Vulgate Bible, they talk, and there's annotations in there where they didn't know how to translate that, so they translated that as Venus. And in Latin, Venus is Lux or Lucidus, which is English for Lucifer. And of course, in the occultic world, Venus is the big allegory for Lucifer or Satan. So all of this sort of comes together on that. And then the other aspect, which I find unforgivable for such pious and learned people to make such a mistake, if you go to Acts 12, it says Easter. And Easter is just another word for the male goddess of Isis or Ishtar or Astarte. Yeah. There's no way they would make that kind of mistake. And you can go look that up. King James Bible, I think it's 12:4, if my memory serves me correct.
So do you have a favorite Bible?
I use about 6.
Okay.
And the reason is I like one in today's language because I'm just more comfortable with that. So I use the 1973 NIV before the political correctness. I'll use 1984 online. But any verse I want to look at closer, I will lay out all the translations I have and try and sort of triangulate a consistency to what the Bibles are saying.
Do you have a photographic memory, or do you know all this stuff just right off?
Sometimes I can remember and sometimes I can't, so it just depends. So
somebody asked a question.
I have a pretty good memory. I have to say that.
Somebody asked a question. Is there anything Gary doesn't know?
Oh yeah. There's lots I don't know. So, and what's important about, and I just wanted to finish on the King James Bible. Here's what's really, really important about it, and why it's Masonic. And they pick certain aspects of the verses out that they give to the lower level because only the depths have this extended level. But they get them to study certain verses that they're going to use in the end time. They interpret the Bible allegorically, that the superficial story isn't the real meaning, it's the symbols and the stuff that you learn in the initiations, what it means underneath. So they're going to use specific verses and specific ones that are designed where it looks like it says Jesus comes from a woman and a man coming from a woman does not rise, he stays dead, that Jesus was mortal and he didn't rise from the cross. So they're going to come at us in the end time to destroy Christianity from within and also using the Bible, and because they're going to come out and say, our people helped write this Bible, and we even put a few markers in there for you to know that we did, and here's the rest of the story from the Polychronicon that we're going to tell you. They're going to turn the Bible inside and out, upside down, into a whole new meaning, and same with Christianity as a whole, and they're going to point to something like Jesus' sign to that generation of his coming would be the sign of Jonah. And they're already out there doing this one. So anybody says, do you believe in the Jonah story? And, with being swallowed by a fish and going down to the grave, and most people kind of go along, well, maybe that's just a story or a parable or an allegory, right? Well, here's the thing. Here's what they're getting at when they start that. If Jesus' only sign to that generation is an allegory, then so is his resurrection. And so understand the planning is my point that these secret societies and these religions are putting in to create the great delusion of the end time and to bring Christianity to its knees and almost destroyed, except for those who are strong in their faith, who will stick with God and Jesus no matter what and understand what's in the Bible, because they're going to turn it inside and out. And also remember, they got to bring it back into the end time universal religion, because this religion will have 2 horns like a lamb but speak like a dragon. So it has to be Christian-like.
Ooh. Okay. All right, here's a question from Kevin out of Kentucky. It says, did the Illuminati create CERN to open up a doorway to let the fallen angels through, and is CERN a time travel machine?
Well, that, again, from the internet and Facebook, that's the big speculation, and that's what they're trying to do. And I think they are trying to. I mean, they're always trying to create a gateway to the abyss to get those angels out, or to another dimension, to bring their gods back. So that's certainly a possibility. I don't know whether it is or not, but I think it certainly is in line with what their belief is. But at the end of the day, if we are to believe the alien mythos, if you were to believe all the other mythologies, if you were to believe Tartarus, there's already portals. So I'm not convinced that that's essentially required, but maybe access to the abyss is. And in the end time, we know a key will be given to an angel that falls to the earth to open it up, but maybe they want to open that abyss up sooner.
Referring back to your subtitle of the descendants of giants planned to enslave mankind, these descendants, I suppose they exist now. Could they be killed in the traditional sense, or
yes.
They could be?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So they're just like humans.
The immortality of the first generation was receded or overruled by God in Genesis 6, where He limits life to 120 years. And I know a lot of people like to say, "Oh no, that means how long before the flood came." Okay, I understand that, but that's not how the original Jewish people understood it. That's not how Josephus understood it, and that's not how anybody of the Old Testament understood it. They understood it that God revoked the immortal spirit after the first generation, and that's why there's a limited amount of immortal demons that are out there.
All right, guest 235 says, Gary, is it true that a mason will be the builder of the new temple when the Dome of the Rock is destroyed?
Well, it's not clear that there will actually be a new temple built in the end time. And if you look at the prophecy of Ezekiel, that's clearly in after the end time. Where that, I think, comes from is that we know the sacrifice is going to be reinstated. And we know that in Daniel it says that will happen on a wing of the temple. Okay, so if there isn't a new temple built, which I'm not convinced prophecy supports that, other than some allusions to this wing of the temple, then the Dome of the Rock doesn't necessarily have to be the place where the sacrifice is going to be offered. It could be off to the side a bit, off on the wing. And there's a lot of speculation that the dome isn't specifically where the Holy of Holies was exactly put, and that there will be this information that comes out, and therefore that is where the sacrifice will be, and that's where the Antichrist will come and do present himself to be God in the temple and cause the abomination. Now, I kind of flip-flop a little bit between that because there has to be a structure for the Antichrist to be crowned in on a wing. So there could be this wing built onto the Dome of the Rock. But it's not the temple, it's not the third temple that people think it is. That comes afterwards.
In your chapter 43, it's titled The Godless Generation. Can we raise our hands for this generation, or is that another generation to come?
Well, just as in the antediluvian epoch, each generation got worse as it went. Could we be worse? I suppose we could, but there's enough credentials for this generation to be the end time, and certainly all of the analogies are there to the time of Noah, or what Timothy talks about in the godless generation, or Paul in the book of Timothy. And so it's only a matter of degree to the godless generation. Is how much more evil do they actually have to be that end result? I think we're, again, very, very close.
Well, I would say that civilization seems pretty evil right now. I don't know. I think the next step is to round up the Christians. But let me ask you something. There was a big battle between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. But the interesting part that I saw was that Cruz was claiming the mantle of God's chosen man. His dad, who was involved with Lee Harvey Oswald, he was declaring, like prophesying that Ted Cruz was the chosen one. You had Glenn Beck out there fasting. Ted Cruz said that all Christians should vote for him, but in the end, they didn't. Does that show some sort of shift in the Christian world, and is that shift a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a significant shift. I think that you can't make an argument that Trump represents Christians better than Cruz does. I think that makes no sense. I think, Trump may be Christian, he may not be. He may be a weak Christian, or he could be a Gnostic Christian. He could have come out of the secret societies. We don't know. But what we do know is he's not nearly as strong in his faith that Cruz is, and demonstrates that every day. So the shift, in my opinion, is away from possibly people who maybe we should be supporting and voting, whether or not you're a Cruz supporter or not, to someone that you're almost throwing a Hail Mary pass, so to speak, for somebody who's going to improve it, because people are so upset, so frustrated, that they want somebody to fight for us, right? As opposed to having the right person fight for us for the right reasons to achieve the right results. I think just like Obama, I mean, if you're not careful on that, you can get change, but are you going to like that change? You should be very, very careful.
Well,
but
yeah.
I do believe if Trump gets elected, he's going to try and shake things up. I just don't know which direction that shakeup goes.
Well, my query on that is how blatant that the Cruz campaign and his leadership there claimed the mantle of God, and I was, it's like, man, that's pretty bold, saying, I'm God's man. I mean, it seems like pride, and we know about that, right? So and
that's a mistake.
Trump.
That's a bridge too far to go. I mean, you are either anointed or you're not. Like you've been called or you're not. And to make that claim, you better be able to back it up. Otherwise, I mean, you're a false prophet, right? So.
Right.
So if they were, and I didn't hear that in any times I heard Cruz talk or the campaign, so I'll take you at face value that they were doing that. And if I would have heard that, I would have been very concerned and upset about that.
Yeah. Just a quick clarification. His father was saying that God told him he's the chosen one. Cruz was saying that all Christians should vote for him because he is the Christian, and he would hold the Bible up. And then, of course, Glenn Beck, he declared several fasts as if, now he's a Mormon. I don't know what that has to tie into it, but he was declaring fast like, okay, they've got all the power of God, they got the anointing of God, they got the calling of God, and out he went. He fell like a chump change, just boom, but like I said, I kind of related this story a little bit. You might recognize this out of the Bible, where there's a parable of a meeting going on, and a guy comes in the back, and then he walks up to the front and says, I'm a good man. I'm the man. I'm going to sit up here. And then the leader says, no, you go sit back there. And then it says that's beware lest thou lift thyself up. Thou be, you go demand to go to the front. You may just be called to the back. That's kind of what happened to him. He said, I'm Ted Cruz. I'm the normal. So anyway, we're moving on. All right, let's get on to chapter 52, the rapture tragedy. What is going on there?
Well, one of the things that unfortunately divides Christianity in all the wrong ways is the timing of the rapture, and whether or not you're pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, or no trib or no rapture at all. I don't think a Christian doctrine should separate Christians, number one. So I respect everybody's point of view, but what I present in that chapter is what if the pre-trib assumption is wrong, and assumption's the wrong word, but the pre-trib position is wrong, and that when they see the Antichrist negotiate world government and the last 7 years of Daniel's 7-year covenant that he talks about, that they're going to say, hey, that's the Antichrist, and they're going to be correct. And they're going to stand up en masse, Christians will, saying, this is the man of evil. Unfortunately, though, they're going to be expecting rapture at that point in time, and they're going to be expected not to be caught up in the genocide that Revelation predicts and other prophets predict. And there's two genocides or holocausts, depending on whether you want to confuse those two terms or not, because there's both going on at that time. Whether or not you want to recognize that or not. So if they have it wrong, then they're going to make Christianity look very bad, because they're going to be saying, that's the Antichrist and we're going to be gone, right? And so people that might be looking to Christians for model of behavior, that's who we should believe in, are going to say, wait a minute, these guys are Looney Tunes. They're just another apocalyptic cult. And they're slurring this great Messiah that's solving the world's problems, and we're not going to have any more people saved by having the timing wrong. I just did a conference in Evansville, Indiana last weekend, and I did one on the mid-trib. I'm more mid-trib, but again, I like to respect everybody's point of view, and I connect the prophecy markers and the timing And I always start with Jesus, with what he said first, and then I assemble all doctrine and all prophecy around that. And I think if you do that, pre-trib, it's a possibility. I hope it happens. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking not. And that's the tragedy that I think we're going to see in the end times. And the saints are going to be shamed.
Well, every time I see Hillary's face and hear her voice, I'm thinking I'm going through the tribulation. So I don't know about that. Man, it's pretty bad. Truth Seeker out of live chat asked this question: is the Bible a flat earth book?
Well, that's, again, another very hot topic that's out there, and I've not been out there and taken a lot of time to research it, and I generally don't take a position on it. But I will say this on flat earth, is a couple of things. I think that when you line up what Scripture says about the earth and the universe and around us, I think you can arrive at a flat earth conclusion. That's certainly a possibility. Whether or not you can fully say that or not, I think you can make that argument. I have a couple things, though. It's counterintuitive to the way I think that it's a flat earth. So, and I'm not going to spend tons of time researching on something, because when I do, I get very obsessive. So I'll be buried in it for 3 years. So I really don't want to go down that far on it. Yeah. But when I look at the sun being visible over the polar caps and the length of the day from all sides, I struggle with how that works. Now, I do know that I can make a case where you could have a flat Earth, and the Earth and the universe is rotating around the flat Earth as opposed to the other way around in the planetary theory, and so that part makes sense. But there's a couple little things like that, and then this thing about dimensions, and is flat Earth 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, and how does that work with 4 dimensions and other multiple dimensions that might be out there? And we know there probably is because of the heavens. So again, I've not made a decision on it. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I've had a lot of people want me to get involved on it. But like I said, I don't want to wrap up 3 years. I'm working on a whole bunch of other things.
I'm wondering if they say when God will create a new heaven and a new earth, I guess that means He'll create a new flat earth for some, and I guess it would be a new flat earth. But all right, hey, we got a question from our Jade, our moderator, our chat moderator. How close are they to figuring out the Hilazon holy color blue is? How close are they to figuring that out?
And what was that word?
It's Hilazon, Hillazon, parentheses, holy color blue. I guess somebody's trying to figure that out. Jade?
Oh, are they looking for? They must be talking about the dye for the rituals of the temple.
Oh. Okay.
And my understanding is they have that today. So if that is the question, is they have that figured out today, and they've got a white heifer, and they've got a whole bunch of other things in place that are all set for the timing of the abomination. So the abomination of the sacrifice, sorry. So if that was what they were asking, then what I've heard and read about it is they have that capability now.
Mm. So you're saying that they are making preparations, trying to get all the pieces together to do that?
Yes. There are, again, there is a very, very sort of ascetic, fundamental sect of Judaism that believes that we are on the edge of the Messianic times, and certainly with the prophecy of the Jubilees that they would be heavily wrapped up with. That begins in 2017, according to the prophecy of Jubilees. And so they are prepared to be able to start the sacrifice again, because they want the Messianic times, as they call it, to come about.
Mm-hmm. Gary, you're in Canada?
Yes.
So did you happen to see the hospital where Ted Cruz was born?
No. I guess that was in Calgary. I did live in Calgary. I'm not even sure what the name of it is. I would know all of the hospitals that are in Calgary if you've got a name handy there.
Yeah. Well, what happened was when he started running for office here in the States, to legally run, he just stopped saying A. And so since he did,
that's not easily done.
So that's how he's getting by with it. I mean, Obama just forged his birth certificate, but Ted Cruz, he just stopped saying A. Hey, what about this here? The fairy, chapter 95, the fairy lords of the Tuatha De Danann. What is going on with the fairy lords, man?
Yeah, so in ancient Atlantis, Ireland was one of the nations of the 10-nation empire of Atlantis. And the Tuatha De Danann are part of the fairy mythology. And so when we talk about the 4 different classifications of fairies, you have the fallen angels, you have the earthborn fairies, which are the Tuatha Dé Danann, you have the demons, which are the spirits of the immortal Nephilim, and then you have the little people, right? That's like wings and elves and things like that. So the Tuatha Dé Danann are the Nephilim of the Atlantean Empire, of the antediluvian epoch, again, that somehow survive in the other world to repopulate Ireland in that mythology. And they're called fairies because they are the fair folk, and they are the fate bloodlines. And the fairy bloodline is also the matriarchal bloodline of the allegories of the bloodlines of the Antichrist and the Nephilim, just as the dragon bloodline is the allegory for the patriarchal or the male side. So the Tuatha Dé Danann are hugely important with the whole idea of these bloodlines, and that's also one of the reasons why you have the Amarna dynasty with Akhenaten and King Tut and Nefertiti heavily involved, because Pharaoh is also, from its initial sort of word, comes from P-H-A-R-E and P-H-A-R-O, fairy or pharaoh. Okay, that was the fairy kingship there. And Skoda, daughter of Akhenaten, in mythology goes to Spain with Gadiel or Niels or several other people. There's several mythologies. And then over to Ireland to interbreed with the Tuatha Dé Danann and create that great fairy sort of dynasty, which also connects back to King Arthur because he's a descendant of the Tuatha Dé Danann. So you have to understand that Tuatha Dé Danann is an extraordinarily important group, and they would be the red-haired, green-eyed version of the Nephilim that I talked about further, and they would also be the ones that part of them escaped out of Tartarus in the Greek mythology in around the area of Transylvania and that whole Dracula thing, which is interconnected on the dragon side of the allegories. And they migrated north, and they migrated to Ireland. So you have the blonde ones and blue eyes, and you have the green and the red-eyed ones. So, or the green-eyed ones and the red-haired ones. So all of the Tuatha Dé Danann I talk about extensively in the book. And connect them back as the Lords of Danu back to the Anunnaki.
Well, see, that's also happens to be a secret policy of Obama. He said that schools have to have a female restroom, a male one, transgendered, and a fairy. So I guess the fairy's going to get their own restrooms too. So we've got that going on. All right. So the descendants we were talking about of your book, the descendants of these giants. Do we normally find them in government? Are they also in religious institutions and educational institutions? All these guys, are they colluding together? Are they getting their orders from some central, dimension that the Satan himself is giving through his demons, or what?
Yeah. So kind of two different sort of veins on that. One is the very visible royal families, whether it's the Windsors of England, and a lot of people speculate that William is going to be the Antichrist, especially with the I am part of William. But certainly that would be sort of a candidate. But you could also look to the descendants of the Stuarts as the Unicorn family, which I'll talk about extensively in the book, as another prime candidate. And you also have the Habsburgs. So you have these royal families that are part of that, right? Then you have these other families that are in behind the scenes, that are the 13 families of purebloods as well, and they're not visible. You really don't see them. You might know some of the names, like one is the Sinclairs, but most people won't know the rest of the names. So what they do then is they work things from the back rooms. And if you see visibility, like everybody thinks the Rothschild is a pureblood, they are not, because they are so visible as example, they can't be. And the Rothschilds actually were an insignificant family until the time of the birth of the Illuminati and the destruction of the Templars, and they needed a replacement for the banking arm. They're actually the Bauer family. Then they were put in place to fund the secret societies and to fund the monarchs for war, and they grew rich on that. And they only changed the name to Rothschild when they set up the London Bank in 1812, as I recall. So,
now you did.
They work all of these other less pure bloods, for the most part, as puppets, and that's who you see. And so the lower level you get, the less purebloods that are going to be there. And not everybody in government is part of the bloodlines, but to get real power, you really need to be initiated, and you need to be purebloods.
Well, you said that I may not have heard of Sinclair, but I do know that Obama had a guy named Larry Sinclair that shared his bathhouse up there in Chicago. Hey, here's a question for Me Too. It says, isn't it amazing how I get those in there? They have nothing to do.
That was a good one.
Okay.
I just slid that one in there, and I'm going, did he just say that?
Right on. I got a thought bubble. I don't know if you can see my thought bubbles, but I got a thought bubble. Here we go. There it is right there. I don't know if you can see that, but I got it up there right now. All right. Me Too says, do you have any thoughts on the Mandela effect and CERN causing it?
I'm not familiar with what the Mandela effect is, so I'm not sure I can comment on how CERN would affect that. Mm-hmm. Are you Dan, familiar with?
No, actually, I'm not. I've heard that. And I didn't research. It's kind of like you and a flat Earth. You see a topic and you want to go, but you got to figure out how much time you want to spend on it. So, I guess this person is asking you to go ahead or would suggest looking into it. So, if somebody knows something really quick,
the Mandela effect, yes.
Yeah, if somebody knows something real quick, just give us a little heads up on that there. All right, and then let's get to this question here from a Truth Seeker. What's your views on the Zionists and the false Jews controlling the earth? Are these part of the descendants? Mm-hmm. Them Jews, man, they out there.
They're out there, and you have to weigh this in, but not in the way that most people sort of think. So, the Zionists actually come out of the Essenes and the princes of Jerusalem after the fall of the Jerusalem the temple, and so they moved to Europe, and this is part of the religious fabric of the secret societies as they mix in with Gnosticism. Mm-hmm. But typically these are not descendants of the giants, although a lot of, whether or not it's the Sinclairs or it's the Payan or the Plantagenet or any of the families, they're going to connect themselves back to the Essenes with intermarriage. They are not descendants of giants. Now, what they are polytheists, and Essenes are significant part of the creation of, first of all, the Priory of Sion, which I know people don't think existed, which created the Templars, which created all the other secret organizations, and the Essenes have the rituals in all of these secret organizations, in particular Freemasonry, so they play a big role. They also play a big role in how they plan on bringing down Christianity from the information that was taken out of the temple through genealogies and other information to bring Christianity down in the end time. So they have control of the secret organizations today in the West, and they work with all of the purebloods, and they married into them, and they're a part of the mix. Mm-hmm. But they are not monotheists, and they are not descendants of giants, but they did marry in.
Mm. Well, there's a lot of incestuous marrying going on. I know that Chelsea Clinton married a money guy from Wall Street, and you talk about sort of incestuous relationships. So it seems like all these people are sort of related anyway in the government.
They are, and it's that continuation of intermarrying on the bloodlines. And what you call it, and everybody in North America, I think, is familiar with the term, is their sort of Americanized term of that is pseudo-blue bloods. Mm-hmm. And they all intermarry within the families to keep those bloodlines pure and the positions of power closed off and the secret societies closed off.
Well, is that because they do have power if they keep their bloodline pure, or is it simply a matter of they check you at the door? Okay, how's your, if you're official blood, they check it, or is it going way back to our original conversation, the first hour? Is that in alignment with the power, receiving power from the other dimensions of the demonic realm? Do they have to keep those bloodlines pure?
Well, I think they want to keep the bloodlines pure because they believe they're superior. They believe they're descendants of demigods, and there's something like the Vril philosophy that there's something in the blood that has the ability to create super beings from the blood that is still there. So they want to keep that blood pure. And secondly is they may or may not, well, they do receive powers from and information from demons and from the angels that weren't put in the abyss, and they talk to them. I mean, you go along the ladder or the hierarchy of the secret societies and you get to the Rosicrucians, and at that level and higher, they talk to their spirit guides, the White Brotherhood, the Celestial Mafia, whatever you want to call them. There's many different names for them. Celestial Mafia is mine, but they converse with them regularly and get information, technology, science, guidance, power, and so that's utilized as well. But typically, you have to be invited. If you want to become like part of the CFR, you're going to have to be invited, and you're going to have to go through organizations and initiations to be eligible. But you have to be invited in the first place, and that typically goes down through family bloodlines. Just like if you're going to be a Freemason, you either have to have all this wonderful new money that they just want to bring you in, like the Bohemian Grove does with American New Money, or you have to have a bloodline, and that's why you just can't go out and join the Freemasonry organization. You have to be invited.
Right, or if you're a Muslim, you got to hump a goat. But let me. You're laughing again now. Hey, but let me ask them. Okay, so they're Rosicrucians, and they got secret seances going on. They're lighting candles, cutting their hands, baby sacrifices. Who knows? Keeping the bloodline pure. How does the people out here fight these descendants of giants and all these ilk? How do we strike back?
The only way we can strike back is to be very, very, participate in governance and to vote, to support people of values that we can vouch for them, and try and push back. I mean, it's our requirement as Christians to follow the law as long as it doesn't stop us from worshiping our God or breaking God's law. Yeah. So the only thing we can do is push back. And these descendants and these organizations and these religions know the only thing preventing them from getting world government is Christianity in the West. So they have to destroy us. And so that pushback does work. We may not realize that. There is a time where nothing will stop it, and we're very close to that, and it has been ordained that the end time will come about, and they're organized to bring it about because they want this rendezvous with destiny, this fight in the end time, because they think they can win. But we can make the world better by not just going underground, right? Stand tall for who we are.
Well, Gary, is it a more mundane type of thing? The controllers are saying, that certain people can have certain jobs, and illegal immigrants got to be legalized, and these and whatever kind of things are these more mundane things. And then let's say the Christians can vote, and so are we talking about controllers who issue laws and regulations, incremental changes that way, or maybe say major changes through executive orders? Are we talking about those kinds of things? Are we talking about a supernatural battle on some kind of scale we can't imagine, where there's demonic hordes in the third heaven and coming down in spaceships? And are we talking about the more mundane type of things, or is there something supernatural going to happen there?
Well, it is supernatural, and even from the aspect that the restrainer is holding things back until the end time, right? So that's why it'll happen when it's ordained. So we are pushing back against supernatural forces all of the time, and we can push back just by being strong citizens and strong Christians, but doing things in a Christian way. We shouldn't be doing things that are non-Christian, and we shouldn't be hateful. But we can push back and stand tall. But we can't prevent what's going to happen.
And what is that?
Well, that's the end time. And it's not that, when people kind of, I think, misunderstand prophecy to a certain degree, that it's in the Bible and it's ordained. Well, in the other religions and other cultures, they believe in the same thing, but they're trying to bring it about. All that happens is God permits them to bring it about at His time. Right? That's why all of these organizations are preparing for their universal religion. They're doing all of the brainwashing. They have control of every lever and every aspect so that they can bring this rendezvous about. And they've been waiting years to do this. They would bring it on sooner if they could, or any time other than God's ordained time, but they'll accept the end time if they have to, and they will.
So would you consider what you're describing the day of the Lord?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We've got this question from Betty in New Mexico, do you see a connection between the Pharaohs and the Pharisees? There's no mention of Pharisees until late in Israel's history.
Yeah, no, that's a very good connection on the words, but the Pharisees don't really have that much in common with the Pharaohs. But the Essenes, they believe their religion came down from Heliopolis as polytheists. And they believe Moses was initiated at Heliopolis and brought the wisdom of and the religion with him to Israel, and somewhere along the lines it was perverted to monotheism, and the Essenes have the pure version. So that would be the only connection back to the pharaohs of a religious nature, not the Pharisees, but the Essenes.
Well, that reminds me, I went to a church one time, and the pastor said, talk about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he says, well, the Pharisees were fair, you see, and the Sadducees were sad, you see. And I said, see ya, bye. And that was the last time I went to that church. I mean, I couldn't, that was so deep, I couldn't even take it. Man, I mean, it was like there's an epiphany there. The epiphany was, get the hell out of there, man. Because there ain't nothing going on at this dead-ass church. All right, here,
well, I just want to say one little bit more thing. I mean, a lot of people, say, well, I thought these scenes were good, and we hear about Qumran and things like that, and you go off on all these things. And I want people to know that they believe, they have two patriarchs that they believed in the most, and they set them up on a pedestal. One is Moses, because they believe he is a polytheist and brought back polytheism to Israel, which is their religion, and Enoch, son of Cain, who wrote the Book of Jubilees, which is their most idolized scripture, which is a polytheist scripture as well, not Enoch, son of the Sethian line. So when we look at that, we need to understand that these are polytheists, right? They're not these monotheists that people think that they are. And they believed in fallen angels, and they would not give up those fallen angels even on names unto death. And they were white garbed, and you can see who they are in the Bible. And most people don't make this connection. I think it's Ezekiel 8. It's about where Ezekiel is being told you're going to see things worse than this. And in the morning, these white-robed people come into the temple, and they don't face the temple. They face the sun and pray to Tammuz. Those are the Essenes.
I'll tell you what, Gary, if I could catch him, I'd make him talk. Those cowboys got ways, man.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Hey, here's a question for you, as we get near the end of the broadcast. Gary, do you see any possibility that we could take the world back, and are the end times inevitable?
Well, I think there was a time we could take the world back, and I suppose is if the whole world would stand up for God, we could take it back. But I think once two things happen that sort of set things out that is going to make things work in a way that Christians are not the whole story. So two things. One is when Israel was given the first covenant, the Holy Covenant, they were to follow God's ways, and if they didn't, if they did, they would get the blessings. If they didn't, they would get the curses. And so destiny or our time is going to be played out through the curses. So it has to be played out. And so avoiding the end time would be fulfilling it through the blessings. And then once Jesus was rejected by the southern kingdom, the Judeans, then for sure it was sealed that it would have to be played out through the curses of the old covenant, even though there was a new covenant that was made. Because the end time requires the coming together of this stick, not only of the tribes of Israel, but the Gentiles as well, into one covenant going forward. So, as Paul said, if the root isn't holy, then neither is the branch. And the root supports the branch, not the branch supports the root. So because of the covenant curses that have to be fulfilled in the second Exodus that's going to come in the end time, and the lost tribes who are going to awake of who they are around the world for this Exodus that will be led by Jesus, this has to be fulfilled through the curses. And it's all been prophesied, and all the words of the prophets will have to be fulfilled.
Is this Exodus you're describing, is that the rapture?
No, it's at the same time of the rapture.
Where are they going? Where's all these people going?
They're going to go to the desert. Revelation 12 and Matthew 24 and the corresponding ones in Mark and Luke talk about a time at the abomination. Now is the time to flee to the desert, right? Mm-hmm. That's the signal for the Exodus. We see this in Revelation 12 where the woman and the son is born and the dragon is thrown out of heaven and the woman flees to the desert and the dragon spews this river at her to overtake her. This is talking about the same event as in Matthew 24 with the signs of the end time, and it's the start of the rapture event at the same time. So all of this is going to happen at the same time. He's going to come back for the Christians, in my opinion, and he's also going to lead them in front, open up rivers, and protect them for 1,260 days in the desert, and not just the people of Judea, but to fulfill the words of the prophets, the lost tribes of Israel or the northern kingdom as well.
So are you a member of the lost tribes?
I don't know. I've not been awakened to that effect.
Oh, really?
I doubt it, but...
Do you think that the people that are will get a notice?
No, they will just be awakened as to who they are, and they'll start following God's ways, and it'll be very, very close and in the time of the end. And it's also at the same timing of World War III. So.
Okay. Wow, man, it's all coming around.
Going on
so what it is though, whether or not we know that we are, we certainly want to be, right? Because if we're not on that list, we're doomed.
Well, no, I mean, you could be Israel, you can be Judea, the 12 tribes in there, and you can be the Gentile Christians. You can just be a believer in God, right? You can be raptured, and even if you are killed, you'll be raised afterwards, right? So. Okay,
all right. So either A, you get raptured, or 3, you get emergency escape to the wilderness, desert.
Yep.
Or you get supernatural powers. Well, listen, Gary.
Some will survive in the end, right? At the end time to repopulate the earth. I mean, there will be some that survive, and Daniel will talk about it. Those who survive to, 1,335 days, which is after the end. Somebody has to repopulate the world in the millennium time, and many will be refined in the end through fire.
Now, as far as I know, I'm not a Canadian expert, but you don't have any deserts up there, man. Are you coming down to the Mojave, or I mean, where's the desert at?
Well, the desert is going to be probably, I think, somewhere in around Saudi Arabia or towards the Euphrates rivers, because if you get into the prophecies of the Old Testament that bring back together, it's talking about the Euphrates River. So there's a lot of dams on the Euphrates rivers. I think those dams are going to be destroyed and to try and wash over the fleeing people from Israel to the desert.
Here's a question that I have though. If those people get the revelations that they're one of the tribes and they're called to the desert, then that tells me that there has to be a fully operational internet system and the planes have to be flying like normal commerce. But you're describing an end time Armageddon. It doesn't sound like everything's going to be normal where you can just hop on a plane and go.
Yeah, things are going to be all messed up with war. I mean, you have World War III and then you have Armageddon. And if you have World War III, you have all the infrastructure coming down in a lot of cases.
So you won't be able to take a flight over there to the desert. Do you think people be supernaturally transported over there?
Well, they're going to be led by Jesus, and the words that are used in Revelation 12 is on the wings of angels. There's only one other place where that's used, and that's in the first Exodus. So there'll be partings of water. We don't know whether or not they're actually going to fly there, they're going to walk there, but it does say on the wings of angels.
So it could be a supernatural transportation over there. We could just literally appear over there.
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking. That'd be a quick move. I'd like to see that one. I'm going to try to find out. Gary, I need to find out if I'm one of the, there's no checklist, there's no prayer, there's nothing you can find out if you're one of those.
Well, on my next book, I'm talking about this whole subject that I'm writing, and so in that, I'm tracing where the lost tribes might be, and also linking prophecy from way back from the time of Moses and Jacob and the blessings. And there's in my understanding, there's a significant case to be made that the United States and a lot of people that are populated in the United States are the descendants of Israel, and in particularly one tribe, Manasseh, and because it becomes greater than Ephraim in the end time, and Ephraim was a group of nations, and so these were brothers, twin brothers, And so they're related, just as the U.S. is related to England, and England was a group of nations, and both of these nations would hold the gates to their enemies, or the ports and things around the world, and they would gore the other nations around the world as we go into the end time. So I'll make a case in my book, without giving away too much of it, that the United States is going to be part of this exodus and the awakening of some of the tribes of Israel. So there's a good possibility many Americans are.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think I might be a member of the tribe of Dan, so I might be in there. Hey,
at least by name, anyways, right?
Okay. Well, sure enough. All right, we're talking about your book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy: How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Planned to Enslave Mankind. Once again, at the end of the broadcast, Gary, how can people get that book?
You can get it through Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, Amazon.uk, Amazon around the world, BarnesandNoble.com. Order it through a store at Barnes & Noble. It's not on the shelf, but they can bring it to the store. You can order it on basically any online bookstore around the world. Most have it. You can also buy it through your Christian bookstore if you want to support them, or another bookstore that could also order it because it's distributed by Send the Light Distribution and Ingram's. And if you want an autographed copy, go to my website. I'll sign it or personalize it in any way that you want and send it out to you.
Okay. All right, Gary Wayne, we appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
You may have me on anytime that you want.
Okay. All right, man. Great. We'll do it, and we'll check it with you later, Gary.
Terrific. Thank you, Dan.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. That was Gary Wayne talking about secret societies enslaving mankind. Oh, boy. And I think we found out you better have, you better be in one of them tribes. Okay. And if you're not, there could be some issues there. So you want to make sure that you're on that list. And we're going to find out maybe in Gary's next book, we can find that out. All right. Next week, Kevin Rand will talk about UFO cover up. Steve Olson's coming back with us talking about, the Nibiru, the planet Nibiru going to smash into us. And then a few more weeks, we'll talk to Wes about Sasquatches. If we haven't had a guest on the program you'd like to see, drop me a line at edgeam@yahoo.com. This program will begin to replay in the main player shortly after the broadcast. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and get my Twitter updates, especially next week at the Indianapolis 500. And then you can also listen to the program on TuneIn Radio and podcast as well. All right, well, that's it. That's a wrap for the Edge broadcast. Thanks, everyone. Had a whole bunch of questions come in. We couldn't get to all of them. Sorry about that. But, man, were the questions great tonight. We appreciate that. I know Gary does, too. Well,